We are moving on to the presentation number 12 with George Castrenze that talks about improving intelligibility of timescale compressed speech for visually impaired and sighted listeners. Okay.
Good evening from Greece. I'm George, and I will present a work done with my colleagues Panayotis, Anna, and Yanis on improving the legibility of timescale compressed speech for visually impaired and sighted listeners. It's not that long as it shows in this slide. I will put you into the perspective of the problem, and I will present the workflow of our method, and then some experiments and some conclusions. So, what is this about? We know that speech recordings are everywhere, on YouTube, Facebook, applications, mobile phones, everywhere. Sometimes there is a need for speeding up speech in order to, for example, promote faster information consumption. There are certain groups, population groups, that benefit from such a thing, like visually impaired individuals who use screen readers in their mobile phones to speed up reading, as well as podcasts or video admirers or transcribers who try to save some time in their work by using sped up speech, let's say. Now, the problem is that when you try to speed up speech, you make it harder for the listener to understand it, because the algorithms that do this work leave out important parts of speech that help us recognize syllables and words. And it has been shown that the majority of those parts that are dismissed are non-stationary parts, like stop sounds or transient sounds or plosives. So we propose a solution in this problem by designing an algorithm that protects non-stationary regions when they are time compressed. So the related work actually is huge. It's not a new method or a new idea, but what we did is the following. When we time scale a speech recording, what we usually do is we chop it into pieces, which we call frames, and then we try to recombine these frames properly in order to expand or compress the output speech. However, if you do that in a clumsy way, or if you're not careful enough, then you may introduce artifacts, which are very, very annoying to our ears. There is a method in the literature called WS-OLA, which stands for Waveform Similarity Overlapad. It's a method that does the following. When individual segments of speech are concatenated during expansion or compression of the waveform, this method tries to find the maximum similarity between adjacent frames in order to make synthesis more smooth. Plus, it reduces phase discontinuities, which can be heard by our ears as clicks, and also ensures that all the periodic patterns which exist in voiced speech are preserved in the output. So we chose this method for many reasons. One of them is that it's fast and simple because it works in time domain. It's able to handle both uniform and non-uniform timescale factors, and the output quality of the synthesized speech is very, very good. However, as I said earlier, when you speed up speech too much, then intelligibility decreases, especially in high timescale compression factors. And this is due to the vanishing parts of speech due to the compression. So to address these intelligibility issues, we thought of protecting parts of speech that are vulnerable to compression, such as plosives, stop sounds, transient parts of speech, etc. The experiment that we did, we used a specific data set for our experiments, which is called GR Harvard. And it's a recently compiled data set that follows the Harvard IEEE structure of sentences of American English as presented in the literature. It contains several phonetically balanced lists, each containing 10 sentences, and we used only 4 of them. Each sentence in the list contains precisely 5 keywords, Each keyword consists of 1 or 2 syllables, and all words within sentences have a maximum of 3 syllables, following the IEEE Harvard style of sentences. Now, what we did is the following. We have a very good method that can compress or expand, but we are interested in compression, speech. So we add a protection method in front of that timescale algorithm in order to protect transient or sensitive, let's say, part of speech that play crucial role in understanding what the speaker has said. So this is the pipeline, this is the flow. We build the protection method, and using that, we call a timescale method to compress the recording. We used 3 criteria to compress, to detect, these interesting parts of speech. 1 in time domain, 1 in the frequency domain, and the combination of both. Let me briefly explain the first 2 and their combination. So the first one takes into account the average power of the signal. So we compute the power of the signal on a frame-by-frame basis, and then we construct the so-called normalized transition rate. So it's like a curve which takes high values when there is a transition between, let's say, silence and a stop sound, silence and a voice sound, etc. So if you apply this criterion on speech waveforms, you get figures like this. On top of each pair of figures, you see a speech signal, and below you see the application of this C1 criterion on the waveform. You see that it's very good if you pay attention to the figures. You see, for example, here on the lower right part of the slide, that it's a very good method to detect abrupt changes in speech signals, but it's also very noisy in voiced sections where it shouldn't be. So we thought of constructing another criterion in the frequency domain. We used the so-called line spectral frequencies, which can be thought of like GPS coordinates of the key features of a sound's tone shape. So using these, we can identify when and how the shape of the sound changes over time. So we used these colored curves that you see here to simplify them. We fitted a straight line locally on each of these colored curves, and we measured the slope of each curve. Then we combined these slopes together, and we implemented the C2 measure of non-stationarity detection. And if you apply this C2 measure, you get these results for these specific speech signals. We see that C2 criterion is unstable in sounds like stops or speech events with short durations, but it's effective in distinguishing voiced sections, the transitions between voiced sections. And it's also less noisy in voiced sections compared to criterion C1. So if we put these 2 together in a new criterion called C3, then we take all the necessary details from C1 and C2, and we construct their combination called C3. I will leave the math aside because this is not the interesting part. The interesting part is this figure. When you apply the C3 criterion on the same speech signals, we see that it's good enough for sounds like stops or speech events with short duration, similarly to C1, and it's also effective in distinguishing voice sections, however, with less noise than C1. So we have a good method to apply timescale factor protection. So we devise a new function that takes as an input the desired scale factor, let's say a speed up by a factor of 2 or by a factor of 3, and it outputs a protected scale factor, which is responsible for protecting certain parts of speech from time compression. So using these 3 criteria, we designed some experiments. We used 2 different groups of people. One group was visually impaired group of people who used a screen reading app, and the control group, which were individuals with normal sight. We did 2 kinds of tests, an intelligibility test and the preference test. And the methods that we compared were the WSOLA as it comes off the shelf, a C3 protected WSOLA which is the same algorithm, but with the C3 criterion of non-stationarity protection, and the same for C1. And we conducted 2 experiments. The first experiment took into account just the methods. So we applied the methods on the speech recordings and we evaluated them. The second experiment took into account a restriction, which is the same word per minute restriction. So let's see the results. In experiment 1, we just compared the methods. We assess whether the incorporation of taking protective measures in non-stationary parts of speech had a positive or a negative impact on the intelligibility of speech signals. These are the methods. This is the flow. It's not very important, but it's what I described earlier. And here is the output for a compressed speech signal by a factor of 2. So top panel is the original speech. Second panel is compressed by a factor of 2, as outputted by WSOLA. Third panel is WSOLA with protection by C3 criterion. And fourth panel is WSOLA with C1 protected criterion. You see that there's a bit of difference in the length of each signal because different algorithms protect non-stationary parts differently. So we conducted an intelligibility test, and you see here the percentage of correct keywords detected by the entire population that we called for the test. The horizontal axis is the scale factor. The vertical axis is the percentage of correct keywords detected. You see that when the scale factor is low, C1 criterion dominates. The same applies for middle scale factors. C1 is better than the rest. When the scale factor goes towards 0.5, which is 2 times speed up, all 3 models have more or less the same performance. This can be verified by statistical significance. So the differences that you see here are, most of them, not all, statistically significant. And also some of them are statistically significant if you do a multi-comparison between pairs of methods. However, if you split by group, you see on the left side of the slide the overall image, and in the middle the control group, on the right the visually impaired group. Due to the fact that we did not manage to collect enough participants, let's say, from the visually impaired group, results are not statistically significant. But there is definitely a trend in favor of C1 criterion of non-stationarity protection. Same pattern applies for the preference test. So we ask the people, which waveform do you prefer? Which sounds better to you? Again, overall, the trend is clear. C1 dominates in most timescale factors, and this can be verified by statistical significance. But when you split by group, you see that things are not that clear for the visually impaired group, probably due to the limited sample size. The second experiment that we conducted is under the equal word per minute restriction, where now the compressed waveforms all have the same length in order to satisfy this criterion. Again, the same methods, again, the same pipeline with some modifications to satisfy the equal word per minute criterion. Now things got much, not worse, but everything was less clear. There was no statistical significance between the 3 methods for some scale factors that we tried. There was no clear image of what's going on. In some scale factors, there was a preference, in others, there wasn't. And as I said, statistical significance was not there. So if you see the same image, split it by groups, again, sometimes WSOLA is preferred, sometimes C1 protection is better than the rest of the methods. Same image for preference tests. Again, not very statistical significance is not really there. And the same applies when you split your data in groups. there's no clear image of which algorithm is the best. So to conclude this, we did two experiments, one using our methods on speech recordings, where we had a clear winner. C1 protection was the best with statistically significant results. In the second experiments, where we had the restriction of equal word per minute, then everything was not clear. It was challenging for listeners to distinguish between the different methods. Probably we need to collect more samples, more listeners, visually impaired or not, to get a clearer image. So what we need to do in the future? Maybe play a little bit with these criteria, C1 and C3, try to make them work better. Call for more people, especially from the visually impaired group. Include these nice methods into popular audio processing and screen reading software on mobile phones for visually impaired people. And maybe do some further investigation into the analysis and preservation of the phonemes targeted by these methods. Might be a good idea for future studies. So thanks, and sorry for being a bit too quick. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you for your presentation. That was really, really interesting.
Let's move on to the talk of Samira Kadelrad. Are you ready, Samira?
Hi.
Hi.
You can see your slides.
Yes.
Yeah, you can see my slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The title of the talk is Breaking the Silence, Language Barriers and Healthcare Struggles of Elderly Afghan Migrants in the Netherlands, Addressing Dementia as a Growing Crisis. So, Samira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all having a great time. I'm Samira from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I just graduated with an MA 1 month ago with my in Applied Linguistics, and this is my MA thesis that I'm going to present. This is conducted under the supervision of Professor Kaiser. Sorry, I forgot to ask, how is my voice? Can you hear it clearly? Okay.
Yes,
So,
loud and clear.
Okay, and also it is carried on within my research training course at Bilingualism and Aging Lab, BALab, at the University of Groningen. So I appreciate you in advance for listening to my presentation. Okay, how can I go to the next slide? Oh, okay. So this is the title. Breaking the Silence, Language Barriers and Healthcare Struggles of Elderly Afghan Migrants in the Netherlands, Addressing Dementia as a Growing Crisis. I would like to clarify that this thesis the topic was not developed by me personally. It's an add-on study to NWO project, Careful About Language, led by Professor Kaiser, my supervisor. NWO and WICI are Dutch abbreviations. Maybe they sound unfamiliar out of the Netherlands. NWO is the Dutch Research Council, and WICI is their competitive funding scheme for senior researchers. Well, let's have a concise overview of introduction and background. Well, according to Livingstone et al. 2017, dementia has been introduced as the greatest global challenge for health and social care in the 21st century. And World Health Organization highlights that dementia is a global public health priority. And as Zorg for Better 2022 highlights, the prevalence of dementia is up to 4 times higher among older migrants and 1 in 10 PWD. By PWD, we mean people with dementia. In the Netherlands, come from migrant background. And Van der Broeke and colleagues 2021 highlights that this population, I mean older migrants, unfortunately experience healthcare inequalities, including delayed diagnosis due to symptoms going unrecognized. And okay, now I can see the whole screen. They also, Van der Broeke and colleagues, highlight that these issues stem from the current healthcare structures that are predominantly monolingual and Western-centric that fail to accommodate linguistic and cultural diversity. So Numerous studies confirm the existence of language barriers in dementia care, according to numerous studies, but according as observed by Kaiser, up to date there is no studies have explored the specific nature of these language barriers and their role in shaping healthcare experiences, healthcare inequities. So against this backdrop, the current study aims to achieve the following purposes. So by focusing on elderly Afghan migrants in the northern Netherlands, which is an often overlooked group in academic research, it addresses a critical research gap and explores self-perceived language barriers and healthcare experiences and develop language-based strategies to improve dementia care, access, and equity for migrant people with dementia, and also contributes to international efforts on dementia-friendly communities while highlighting the gaps in linguistic and multicultural contexts. So 3, but actually 4, because of the time constraints, we decided to keep it short. 3 research questions guided this study. What specific language barriers do elderly Afghan migrants and their informal caregivers face in accessing the healthcare system in the Netherlands? 2, how do these language barriers impact their healthcare experiences? And 3, what language-based strategies can be developed to improve communication, accessibility, and healthcare outcomes for this population to mitigate disparities in healthcare services? Well, how this study was conducted? A research approach was adopted. We adopted PAR, Participatory Action Research, which actively involves participants in identifying challenges and co-developing solutions, which is we can say that it is a qualitative design. And the study involved 15 Afghan migrants, both male and female, organized into 3 natural family-based groups, so 3 family groups. Each group included 1 elderly migrant, all dealing with age-related health issues, and 3 informal caregivers, family members, one of whom acted as the main caregiver because of performing 24/7 care, and 1 community member providing additional support. Okay, the procedure, we started with semi-structured interviews, one-on-one interviews, in order to cover research question 1 and 2, what language barriers are and how they role the healthcare experiences. After 1 week, we held first focus group in order to co-develop. It should have been co-developed, not developed, co-developed initial strategies. After another 1 week, we had the second focus group in order to refine and finalize the strategies. Well, how did we analyze data? Using Brown and Clark's framework, thematic analysis was performed on interview and focus group discussion data. Also, we used Atlas-sized software to facilitate data coding and thematic clustering. So results, we gathered a rather substantial amount of data. Let's say core challenges identified through interviews and co-developed language-based strategies identified through focus group discussions. So this is the general overview of what we found from interviews, but because of the time limitations, we have to skip them, but it's okay because based on these participants co-developed the strategies, co-developed strategies, consolidated thematic overview of focus group discussion findings across all groups. I'm going to read out the titles. So they proposed institutionalized interpreter integration and dual layer support. This is because they haven't experienced Persian interpreters, but there are Arabic and Turkish interpreters in healthcare system, and they don't want like volunteer helpers. They need formal and professional interpreters, translators that are also culturally attuned. So number 2, they suggested is smart and accessible language technology, the use of AI-based tools, of course, under human supervision. Number 3, remote pre-visit and follow-up language support. 4, culturally and linguistically matched mental health services. They called for Persian-speaking psychologists, not only for the elderly migrants, but also for their family members, like informal caregivers, because of the trauma and sad background they are dealing with, and they cannot share with family members. So number 5, culturally sensitive clinical interaction and visual tools. 6, culturally managed volunteer desks and food standards, like the provision of standardized halal food with clear labeling and Persian language menus. Number 7, educational tools and language courses for empowerment. This applies also for the formal caregivers, the hospital healthcare staff, because migrants expect them to have a basic understanding of their salient cultural values. They think it is linked to their well-being as a core of a healthy life. And 8, the last not least, inclusion of migrant voices in healthcare feedback. So we extracted a few key points from discussion and conclusion section. We witnessed a significant diversity across even only 3 families, which highlights the need for person-centered, linguistically sensitive care, as already mentioned by previous research. And this study also supports Tribe and Lane's finding in 2009, which highlights the therapeutic effect of communication in L1 that was obvious for us through their expressions of appreciations for being the center of research and to be chosen as the participants. And number 3, complexity. Although language barriers are complex, the possibility of tailored and culturally informed solutions are there. And despite the short time frame and small sample size, valuable insights emerge through qualitative depth and participatory approach, and through their lived experiences of an often overlooked population. So for the future directions, future research may explore the scalability and long-term impact of these strategies across diverse migrant communities, or they may conduct comparative research across cultural groups to identify both shared and community-specific challenges. Well, this brings me to the end of my presentation, but I don't know why it pops up late, sorry. So many thanks for this opportunity, and I welcome any questions and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
Hi.
I think, yeah. Hi. So the next presentation is by Poroma Suvarmostafis, if my pronunciation is right.
Yes, it is.
And the talk is entitled Language Attitudes, Condition, Gender-Based Asymmetries in Child Direct Speech, Exploring Morphological Variation in Background.
So let's start. So my study is titled Language Attitudes, Condition, Gender-Based Asymmetrics in Child-Directed Speech, Exploring Morphological Variation in Bangla. So this is a joint project between the University of Edinburgh and the North-South University in Bangladesh. So this was actually my part of my master's dissertation, which I later, I added more data on this, and then it's currently we are working on it, and we're adding even more data so that we can publish it in a journal. But for now, let's start talking about it. I imagine, okay, so, right. So this is the study at a glance. So we mainly focus on, and I don't know how many of you know about Bangla in general, but it's a language spoken by a lot of people around the world. And we mostly focus on Bangla spoken in Bangladesh and not in any other parts of the world. And then we explored the morphological variation, as I mentioned in the title, the gender differences in CDS, which is child-directed speech, and how language attitudes is playing a role in how people use or utilize morphological variation when they are talking to children. So to talk even more about this, let me give you a brief overview of what this is talking about, or what Bangla is, or what am I talking about when I'm talking about Bangladesh. So if you're unfamiliar with it, Bangladesh is a South Asian country just beside India, and we are kind of surrounded by India from all three sides, and but then again we do have the Bay of Bengal in the bottom. And so what we have here is a map of the all three countries. So this is Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. So previously, before when there was a colonial rule in this part of the world, we had three, like one united country, and later it was divided into two. Then it was West Pakistan, East Pakistan, which is present day Bangladesh, and India in the middle. But then we had another war, the Liberation War of Bangladesh, where we gained independence from Pakistan in 1971. So now we have two separate countries. But because of all these shifts that we see throughout the history, so we have a lot of different languages playing different sorts of roles in these areas. So first we have the colonial rule, a very heavy influence of English. Then we have West Pakistan, so a very heavy influence of Urdu. And then because India is so close to the country, so we have Hindi as well. And even inside the country and the parts of India that is surrounding it, people are speaking in Bangla as well. And that Bangla is also different from the Bangla spoken in Bangladesh. So our study mainly focused on the Bangla that is being spoken in Bangladesh and not specifically West Bengal or any other parts of the world. So even in this very small country that we have a very two types of varieties we have identified. So which is one is the pure or the standard variety, which we are calling as Shadhu Bhasha, and then the other variety, which is vernacular and non-standard, we are calling it Cholito Bhasha. And it's quite interesting how there is an interplay between these two varieties, because mostly from previous studies we have noticed that usually it's the standard variety that gets more prestige associated with it, as well as people having more acceptability towards the standard variety. But we wanted to explore whether this particular attitude shift is something that is seen in when people are talking to their children. So then we moved on to exploring what are the actual differences between the verbs in standard Bangla and non-standard Bangla. So we focused on the present tense, not past or the future. We focused on the present tense, and then we identified how, depending on whether it's indefinite, progressive, or first person, second person, how different sorts of suffixes are added to the verb. So to give you an example, so this is a Bangla word which is core, and it means to do something. So when we are adding this cho suffix to it, it becomes it's doing. But when it's tetso, it's also doing, but it's essentially this one is kotro is standard and koteso is non-standard, that is being shown here. So we mainly focused on the progressive and the perfect tense varieties, not the any other ones. So later when we found out that there is a verb conjugation difference between the two varieties, we moved on to language attitudes in general. And this is just gives like some previous studies done on previous languages on how people view each of the varieties when you have two types of varieties in one particular language. And this is just reiterating what I just mentioned about having the standard language having a higher regard. Then we moved on to we mainly focused on child-directed speech. So child-directed speech is essentially when the speech is directed towards children by their parents or caregivers. It can be anyone around them, as long as it's being the child is the direct referent of the speech and not anyone else. So then we identified a couple of studies that I felt like this are worth mentioning. So from Roberts and Lebov, although this study is a bit old, but this was quite relevant in the sense that they did mention that children are non-monostylistics, so they are proficient in acquiring all varieties available to them. And one part of another one was from research which said that mothers prove to be more conscious about when they're using which kind of variety depending on the gender of the child. And from at the end, we have another one which says that by school going age, the kind of shifts that we are seeing right now, it kind of lessens quite a lot. So then we moved on to the research questions that how do Bangla speaking parents from Bangladesh style shift in CDS? So is there a shift in the first place, whether when they are talking to children and based on which gender the child belongs to, is there any kind of difference that are the parents using standard variety or are they using the non-standard variety, and how much the shift is happening? So there comes the second question: to what extent variables such as gender and age of children affect the variation in parent speech? Is there greater use of standard with girls, because that is what we were noticing or observing around us? And then we said that what attitudes, language based and societal influence the choice of parents to style shift between the varieties in CDS. So then we moved on to methods. So as I mentioned that this was actually part of my master's dissertation, and from there we and I didn't have easy access to a lot of Bangladeshi families in the UK. So because I did my master's in the University of Edinburgh. So that's why I actually had to take data from naturally recorded YouTube blogs instead, which made it digital research instead of a very like a one that is actually I go into the field and record someone, not like that. But I did go through 5 hours worth of video material, and I coded like around 1,000 words forms, and then they had parent to parent, mother to daughter, mother to son, father to daughter, father to son interactions. So this was actually a corpus linguistics based research where I had this whole corpus of data where we've coded which variety was the standard one, which variety was which verbs were the standard, which verbs were the non-standard, how the root verbs are associating with tense, aspect, and person. And then we also did so this, because this was a mixed method approach, we had a qualitative data as well as a quantitative data which we analyzed in R. So we had focus groups and online questionnaires, but I won't bore you with it because it's quite long. Let's just quickly move on to the results itself. So when we actually looked into the actual use of or proportion of usage of the morphological variation, we saw that when it's parent to parent, it's quite similar, or there's no particular difference between the vernacular variety and the standard variety. But when it comes to the father to daughter, the use of standard variety goes up quite a lot. But it's not the same as how you would see in father to son interactions. The same thing happened with mother to daughter interactions as well, where we see a very high number of, or a greater significance in the standard variety compared to mother to son interactions. And so among all of this, we see that mothers are more prone to use the standard variety, especially with girls, when they're using this sort of like when they're picking varieties when in their CDS. And then we also had another interlocutor pairing where we predicted the proportion of use of standard Bangla. So they were very selective, and when they were style shifting, they showed a very strong, like I just mentioned, that they showed a great inclination towards standard Bangla. When they were talking with daughters, the frequency was very high, and it did not match with the sons. And it was quite apparent. then we also added registers and how it affected, like whether it was associated with child's age as well. So in this one, it was particularly interesting because we saw that as the children grew older, the amount of standard language use actually went down a lot. It was not the same like when they were very young. The amount of standard variety being used with them was quite high, but as they grew older, the kind of usage went down quite a lot. So, and then we also added all these attributes. So this was like a sociolinguistic research, and that's why we also wanted to ask the parents that or the participants whether they associated any sort of social attributes to all these varieties, and we did find a lot of interesting results. I don't know if you can see it clearly or not, but we do have all these social attributes as in feminine, masculine, lower class, middle class, city, rural speech, childish, educated, formal, friendly, old-fashioned, pretentious, relatable, slangy, and trendy, all these different sort of social attributes. And these were the major kind of aspects that we found in this one were that neither standard or non-standard were associated more standard or feminine or masculine, but we did see a weak association of standard Bangla with the lower class. And when both standard and non-standard were associated with city speech, but when it comes to non-standard, is very rural based, or people think that it's only spoken by people who are not really economically affluent, or they come from a very rural background. So then we also had all these other, but I think I'm kind of running out of time, but I'll just make this short. But so this was essentially what this all came down to, it that with standard Bangla, the standard variety, it gave a very formal, very educated status, a very higher regard, like it has been noticed in other languages as well. And we see a kind of very different picture for the non-standard variety, and probably this is one of the reasons why parents are attributing this to the this being the thing that they're using in their early childhood. So we had a couple of qualitative comments, and then a couple of factors came out very quickly that when they're talking about education and career, they're focusing on standard Bangla. When they're focusing on female respondents favoring the use of standard Bangla, they are saying that girls are more likely to get married and go into another family, and if they use the proper language, then they will have a more of a better standing at their in-laws family. And this is something that you have to be born in this part of the world to know, like how important it is for girls to get into this whole situation with marriage and stuff, because career is something that is not really I mean, I'm not saying that people are not focusing on their careers, but this is something that is an issue in this part of the world. Then we kind of came down to the overall gender associations, and style shifting is being mirrored in all these CDS situations as well. And in summary, let me just conclude with this, that in summary, we can just say that there's a strong tendency for mothers to style shift, and it's less frequent with their sons. And standard language is essentially considered as the higher prestige variety. And maybe because of the higher prestige, females are more likely to use it than males. And this is associated with how they view their role in society in general. Okay, so that are my references, and thank you.
Thank you, Karon, for your presentation. We are just on time, so if you have one or two quick questions, and then we move on to actually our presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Now our turn. So let's start. Our talk is titled On the Multifunctionality of Literally in American Youth English. So the aim of the study is to investigate, sorry, just an issue with the slides, okay? It seems it's
Okay.
okay. So the aim of the study is to investigate with both a qualitative and a quantitative perspective the multifunctionality of the English adverb literally in present-day American youth speech, in order to better understand the ongoing syntactic and pragmatic changes involving this adverb. Drawing from authentic spoken data taken from a teenage podcast, the analysis explores how literally is used beyond its prototypical literal meaning, that is, in a literal sense, as in examples 1 and 2. Here you have the roadmap of the talk. In fact, in recent years, literally has grown in frequency and its semantic value has become a matter of debate. Some English speakers argue that literally is overused and misused. Dictionaries have added new meanings for this entry, and among scholars, the phenomenon has been receiving considerable attention over the past decades. Previous studies on literally illustrate its development as the result of grammaticalization or pragmaticalization in ways similar to other adverbs such as really and actually, among others. Grammaticalization is the process by which a word gradually shifts from a lexical to a grammatical function. However, since pragmatic items do not perform grammatical function in the traditional sense, morphological, syntactic, the term pragmaticalization is used to more precisely refer to the development of discussed pragmatic functions. This phenomenon is typically associated with features such as greater syntactic freedom, scope increase, optionality, and strengthening of pragmatic input. Furthermore, the semantic bleaching of literally can also be analyzed in terms of intersubjectification, as it follows a trajectory from less subjective referential meaning to subjective meanings concerning speakers' belief and attitude, and ultimately to intersubjective meanings that strictly pertain to the interpersonal and conversational domain. In more traditional accounts, like Pericatali, literally is described either as a subject, that is a reinforcing adverb, or as a disjunctive, that is a metalinguistic comment. They also describe some modern use as absurd. Powell highlights the continuity across the literal and obliteral uses, emphasizing a core literal stance, while Israel describes a gradual shift from a strictly referential function toward more subjective and performative uses. More recent and corpus-based studies, including works by Calum, Buenomar, and Armour, confirm this development. In particular, Armour also shows the rise of pragmatic functions. Now, while recent empirical studies are mostly focused on British English, our analysis aims to bring new insights into the development of literary in American English, focusing on informal conversation among young. Our dataset consists of 23 episodes of Log Podcast 2024, a show designed for a teenage audience, hosted by 5 young Americans aged between 15 and 24. The corpus, therefore, consists of authentic spoken data, informal face-to-face spontaneous conversations among the 5 hosts, covering everyday topics. In order to search, manage, and analyze the textual data, we employed 2 digital tools that are Filmot and Sketch Engine. Every occurrence of literally was analyzed with respect to its syntactic distribution, its scope, and its semantic pragmatic function in context. It's worth of note that across the 23 selected episodes literally occurs 327 times, from a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 36 occurrences per episode. It is used far more often than honestly, definitely, and absolutely. The frequency of literally in our corpus is remarkably high, as you can see, especially considering that this semantic shift is a rather recent phenomenon. Moving on to the analysis of scope and syntactic behavior literally, the table 3 in this slide shows that literally exhibits a wide collocability and syntactic flexibility. The medial proverbial position, as illustrated in example 3, is still the most common position for literally, in line with the results of previous research. Typically associated with the frequent use of literally as an emphasizer. It is worth noting a modest preference for left peripheral dislocation, along with 11 instances of literally used as standalone. Moreover, if we move on to the next table, which shows the distribution of literally across different syntactic patterns, we see that it occurs quite frequently as either a semi-independent item or a fully standalone marker. Building on what we said earlier, these findings altogether support the hypothesis of an ongoing grammaticalization and intersubjectification, pointing toward more pragmatic and discourse-related functions. Indeed, as we are going to describe in detail, such functions are typically found when literally is syntactically detached or semi-detached, occurring at the sentence periphery or interpolated, carrying no propositional meaning and having global scope over the discourse as a whole rather than a local scope. Now, moving on to the textual analysis, the data confirms that the great functional versatility of literally compared to previous studies. In our dataset, literally shows a more nuanced and wider range of functional layers. As shown by figure 1, literally serves 10 distinct functions, which can be grouped into 3 functional macro categories, following a trajectory of increasing intersubjectification. So, moving from metalinguistic in blue to emphatic in green to discourse pragmatic operator in orange. Overall, it's significant that metalinguistic functions, those closer to the original lexical meaning of literally, are less frequent than subjective and pragmaticalized functions, which is an evidence of an ongoing semantic bleaching. Let us start from the prototypical metalinguistic function of literally. As a metalinguistic operator, literally can be paraphrased as in the truest sense of the word, not figuratively. And it's used when the speaker wants to disambiguate any potential metaphoric or hyperbolic interpretation, as in the example 4, as well as with real numbers or clear quantities, as in the example 5. Then, a related subtype function, the metalinguistic emphatic, appears to be bridging function along the intersubjectification line, as it links its strictly and pure metalinguistic meaning involving literal accuracy with more intersubjective meanings, involving notions such as mirativity, emotive intensity, surprise, or shock towards an utterance that the speaker themselves perceives as extreme and hard to believe. The emphasis conveyed by literally I kid you not, in the example 6, provides clarification on this point. While still disambiguating any potential hyperbolic reading, literally also functions as a reinforcer, roughly paraphrasable as really or I assure you that, thus signaling the speaker's subjective commitment towards the utterance. We almost died. Additionally, literally occurs in the present dataset as a de-emphasizer and mitigator of a statement, marking that the situation is simpler than it might appear and reducing the action's relevance or the speaker's communicative commitments. In similar context, it can be paraphrased as simply, nothing else than, often in combination with just, as in the example 7.
Okay, now I'll take it from here and go on with the next macro category and its functional layers. In our dataset, literally is most frequently used as an empathic operator. When functioning as a truth empathizer, as illustrated in 8, literally is partially synonymous with really and actually. This type of use appears to be the result of a reanalysis of the merative reinforcement discussed earlier, so that literally turns out even occurring in sentences that are not open to second readings and that don't need to be disambiguated, thus showing clear semantic glitching. In fact, the adverb partially backgrounds its core metalinguistic sense in favor of conveying plain emphasis and truthfulness, as well as the speaker's degree of commitment and reinforcing the stance and feelings toward the proposition. Moreover, literally can function also as a focalizer, when its primary role is to emphasize and assert the identity of two arguments, as can be seen in example 9. Here, literally focalizes the identity between the actual event of the paint's falling of the wall, to which actually relates, and the topic discussed earlier by Cash and Kate. Similarly, as shown in 10, literally can also emphasize the temporal simultaneity of two events that are, on the one hand, a finished Potkin snaps, and on the other hand, I said I'm going to click. Let's now take a closer look to another common function of literally. It functions as a rhetorical emphasizer when it co-occurs with metaphorical expressions and hyperbolic language, as in the example here, 11. Here the speaker sets up a clear contradiction between, on the one hand, what he states, which is an hyperbole, since actually fatty girls don't get a piercing for sure, and on the other hand, the suggestion of a literal reading, prototypically cued by the word literally itself. In fact, Maverick just wants to be resonant and to sound unpredictable, and he uses literally not to mean non-figuratively speaking, but rather to draw attention on the language itself and pursue its expressiveness and interactional goal. In this sense, the prototypical metalinguistic function of commenting on the style and language used is here taken to the extreme somehow, and quite strikingly, literally becomes a way of appreciating the non-literal, as Powell states. Now, when literally modifies an adjective, it seems to function as a means intensifier, as in example 12. By emphasizing the speaker's commitment to the truth value of the sentence, when used before an adjective, literally ends up enhancing the intensity of the property expressed by the adjective and can be paraphrased as completely, totally, absolutely. Another functional layer within the emphatic macro category is the use of literally as illocutionary emphasizer. If we look at examples 13 and 14, literally here reinforces the illocutionary force of the speech act, which is performative in this case. The use is more peer-oriented than speaker-oriented, and the fact that literally also carries international prominence and appears at the periphery of the sentence further proves that similar instances represent a successive shift and the bridging context toward the level of intersubjectivity. With this, we move to the third functional macro category, namely the discourse pragmatic uses of literally, where its original lexical sense appears to be fully bridged. In this role, it takes scope over the communicative act as a whole, rather than the proposition or part of it. In our podcast, speakers employ literally for different interactional functions, for example, to attract the attention at the beginning of a sentence, or to hold the floor and claim attention after an interruption or with laughter, claiming the relevance of what they say. They can use literally to secure the conversational turn and maintain an expressivity while brainstorming their thoughts, as in example 15, where literally seems to be a mere kilo word. In our dataset, literally also occurs as a standalone item, either as a standalone response, signaling affirmative behavior and agreement, or as a standalone question, as in example 16. Here the question literally expresses incredulity and doubt, similar to seriously or really, referring to an unexpected action performed by Cash before. Notably, in this context, there is no reference to anything literal in the utterance, and the lexical meaning of literally is entirely bleached. In conclusion, the analysis of literally within LOL podcast has allowed us to do several noteworthy observations. First, literally has acquired a high frequency, a considerable syntactic flexibility, and a layered set of semantic pragmatic functions. Moreover, our analysis has brought to light uses of literally that have not previously received systematic attention in linguistic research, namely its use as vocalizer or as a de-emphasizer and illocutionary emphasizer, and has contributed to provide a more fine-grained account of its discourse pragmatic functions, including its use as standalone question marker. Therefore, these results contribute to a deeper understanding of the multifunctionality of literally, further supporting the idea of an ongoing grammaticalization and pragmaticalization process. Following a path of increasing intersubjectivity, this development ranges from expressing literal accuracy to emphasizing strong subjectivity and speaker assertiveness, to serving interpersonal procedural functions such as floor holding, attention getting, turn taking, and illocutionary reinforcement, among others. Here is some reference of today's presentation, and thank you very much for your attention. We are just behind 3 minutes behind the schedule, so if you have any question, you can write it in the chat or maybe send it per email. We will answer later. Thank you once again.
Yes, I think it's time to move on to the next presentation. Okay, next presentation is by Isra Kari.
Yeah.
And Isra.
Hi.
And the talk is entitled Prayers as Forms of Speech Act Modification in Saudi ELT. Floor is yours.
Very good. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Isra Qari. I work at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And thank you so much for having me today. My research today is called Prayers as Forms of Speech Act Modification in Saudi Hijazi Arabic. The background of the study, it started when I first studied politeness theory by Brown and Levinson. I realized that a lot of the indirect strategies that are used to soften speech acts in English were not really present in Arabic, specifically in Saudi Hijazi Arabic, which is my first language. So, for example, in English, to soften a request, the typical way is to use modal verbs like could, would, may, also to use conditionals or past tense forms, like I was wondering if, it would be great if, or also employing downtoners, hedges, like do you think you might be able to, could you possibly tidy up a bit? So in Arabic, requests are often formed using the imperative, like go, do, help. So how do Arabic speakers achieve politeness in requests? Then I realized it's the prayers embedded in our speech. This is how we achieve politeness. And it's not only in requests, it's possibly in all speech acts. So first of all, let's know something about prayers, like what are prayers? Prayers are Allah invocations or God invocations that are fixed religious terms, which are highly frequent and multifunctional in casual and informal conversations among native speakers of Arabic. For example, inshallah, that's a bit well known, God willing. Also, Jazakallah khair, may Allah reward you well. Muslim societies, even the ones whose first language is not Arabic, use them in their everyday speech. They're also found to be used by non-Muslim native Arabic speakers who live in Arabic-speaking countries. Prayers have been studied by Arab linguists and found to be mostly employed as linguistic tactics or tools to achieve politeness. Shammas studied these prayers, and he's one of the first ones to study them empirically, and stated that they're specific to Arabic in a way that makes them very difficult to translate into other languages. Other linguists suggested that such phrases are widely used among Arabs, regardless of their religious affiliations. like, for example, Clifton Hilani in 2010. And these expressions were identified by different names in the literature, such as Allah lexicon, God wishes, Arabic God phrases, religious formulas. In our study, we just call them prayers. Aims of the study. This study draws its theoretical background from politeness theory and speech act theory. It aims to determine whether these prayers are used in some or all of the speech act types that are created by Searle in 1969. These are classified as assertives, for example, statements, claims, reporting on something. Directives, also examples are requests or ordering, so asking the hearer to do something. Commands, commissives, things that the speaker says, for example, promises that the speaker makes, pledges, guarantees. Also expressives, which are used basically to express the speaker's psychological state. It's whatever the speaker feels at that moment, like thanking, apologizing, congratulating, regretting, any feeling. And declarations. So declaration is basically any word that brings about a change in the world, such as when someone says the typical phrase, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." So that's the change in the world as we know it. And also the study will investigate the prayer's pragmatic functions, or let's say locutionary roles within these speech accents in obviously just Hijazi, Saudi Hijazi Arabic. Methodology. The study used mixed methods, where data was collected through discourse completion tasks, DCTs, and naturally occurring conversations among speakers in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. A total of 180 participants, balanced across gender and age groups, contributed to the data set. In terms of analysis, instances of prayers embedded within speech acts were first identified and then analyzed in terms of speech act type, according to Searle's classification. And then they were further analyzed in terms of their pragmatic functions, and also the speech act type in which they most frequently occurred. So some examples are first greetings. So assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. These are ritualized greetings when you meet someone, is to start a conversation as well. And in terms of Searle, it's considered an expressive. So you're expressing something. The translation is peace be upon you, and upon you be peace. And also fi amanillah, or in God's protection. That's basically something that you say most of the time. You say it when you end a conversation and you're entrusting the listener to God, basically. Other expressions are expressions of acceptance and consoling. So no power or might except with God. And this is something that's used for consoling someone, especially in a death situation. Also, expressions of wishes and blessings. So let's say maybe positive emotions. So may God grant you success. May God make things easy. May God make you happy, preserve you. May he not humiliate you. So all these things are expressing wishes, wishings, and also their polite appeals. They soften the request. So for example, if you want to request, usually in Arabic, you say, "Help me, may God not humiliate you. Do this for me, may God make you happy." So this is why it's very, very easy to use the imperative in Arabic, because they're followed by these prayers. And basically what happens is that for students, for Arab students or EFL students as well, when they translate this to English, they translate it as the imperative, and then the prayer, they say please. So do it, please. They think please replaces the prayer. And that's something that we always find as English teachers, we find as a problem in specifically Arabic EFL learners. Moreover, there were expressions of disapproval and humor. So I seek refuge in God. It's something that you say after you hear something bad, or may God disgust you if someone tries to disgust you. So like back, you're giving it back, like may God disgust you too. And also you can use the same expressions for playful teasing. So as a sense of humor, you say, may God cut off your looks. I know it's weird, but yeah, we use that all the time. So you can see that these prayers are used for positive things and negative things, for all kinds of emotions, but they're mostly expressives, especially in terms of the classification of Searle, a speech act classification of Searle, 1969. So again, there's expressing of praise, gratitude, glory be to God, may God reward you, praise be to God, there's no friend like you, and also just repeating God's name. So if you want to praise someone, you just say, God, God, you're beautiful. Yeah. So to show, I don't know, praise, gratitude, appreciation, astonishment, amazement, surprise, you just use it by mentioning God. And these prayers, they're usually used for positive politeness. If we want to talk about politeness theory, Brother Levinson. Also, they can be used for condemnation. So not only good things, also bad things, like may God not grant them success, may God not give them what they want. So when you want to express anger, or you're condemning someone, you're complaining, you're expressing disdain, you use also these prayers. And there were only 2 instances of, so all these speech acts that we, all these prayers were expressing the speech act of expressive in terms of serial, but only one was expressing directive, which is say by God. So if someone says something, you say by God. You request basically confirmation of your truth or whatever you're saying. So truth claim. You want the hearer to affirm by saying by God, and also one commissive, which is God willing, or I promise you, by God, I will promise you. So you're affirming a future plan using God's name to strengthen the future promise that you're giving the hearer. In terms of results in general, so in the results, there were a total occurrences of 1,437 accounts of prayers. They were distributed across 3 of Searle's 5 speech act types. A total of occurrences, there were 1,010 expressives, 426 commissives, and just 1 directive. Unsurprisingly, there were no representations of either declarations, which is now, I now pronounce you husband and wife, or assertives, because assertives, you're just saying something. It's just basically talking. This suggests that Saudi Hijazi prayers are rarely employed to assert facts or propositions. Instead, their pragmatic function is primarily and overwhelmingly through this data is centered on signaling a wide range of interactional strategies, emotions, and these basically these social strategies, as we saw in the results, they include positive attitudes such as expressing solidarity, thanks, compliments, praise, care, love, respect, all that, and also mitigation of the force of the direct request. So to soften the imperative, a prayer would normally come before or after the imperative. For example, as I said, like, help me, may God not humiliate you, or may God keep you happy, do this for me. Yeah, so it can come before or after. And another function is protection from the evil eye. So prayers can also be used to seek refuge from the evil eye. And of course, the expression of all these emotions that we talked about, the positive ones, which are like wishes, hopes, love, gratitude, also interest, amusement, humor, and also negative ones such as sadness, anxiety, guilt, fear, disgust, contempt, anger, and injustice. In terms of politeness theory, the central pragmatic function of these prayers through the lens of politeness theory is to perform or act as positive politeness markers. This is achieved by demonstrating, as we said, solidarity, building rapport, claiming common grounds with the hearer, cultural cohesion, rather than serving as negative politeness markers, such as indirectness through apologizing, hedging, giving the hearer space, also using conditionals, using the passive voice. This was not used. Prayers were not used for that. They were used mainly for to achieve positive politeness in terms of politeness theory. As a final discussion, the current study contributes to the understanding of how religious expressions in Saudi Hijazi Arabic are used and interpreted pragmatically and influenced by contextual factors. The study also highlights the central role of religious language in shaping politeness strategies in Saudi Hijazi Arabic and in Arabic in general. Prayers serve not only as linguistic embellishments, but also as key internal modifiers to our speech, to various speech acts. The study contributes to broader discussions of Arabic politeness, Arabic pragmatics, politeness theory, the interface between language and religion, suggesting that prayers are essential components of pragmatic competence and should be considered in the intercultural communication and language pedagogy. And with this, I conclude my presentation. These are the references. That's the page 1, page 2. And that's it. Thank you so much for staying till the end and listening through the whole presentation and for your attention. I hope you found my presentation useful and interesting. Thank you so much.
Okay, sure.
Thank you for your presentation. That was interesting. Thank you very much. Are there any questions before moving on to the next presentation? Any quick questions?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the interesting presentation. I am very curious about how people respond to these expression, the God-related expression. For example, when rejecting a request politely, do they also use these kind of expression, including prayers in conversation?
So, sorry, what's the question again?
When they hear these kind of God-related expression, let's say that's a request.
Okay, so for example,
God-related expression. Yeah, how do you respond to this kind of request?
So if the hearer, if I'm talking to someone who is also Saudi or Arabic or someone who is Muslim or understand my culture, it's very easy for them to respond because there are fixed responses. For everything that I say, there's fixed responses. For example, even when anyway, I will not give you I don't want to take from anyone's time, but anyway, there's basically it's a way of talking. It's if I say something, a person who knows about the culture will understand and will know exactly what to say in that situation. With foreigners, usually Saudis and Arabs do not use them. They understand that these are very culture specific. They don't use them, but what they do is that they use the same direct request forms in English, but then they add please, and they think please basically has the same pragmatic function of the praise, which they don't. So do it please, help me please. Also, sometimes when you speak to someone who's like, your professor, for example, or someone who is a hero who's got a higher status than you, please is not really enough. In English, we noticed that especially British English native speakers, they can use with modifiers, they can use up to 5 modifiers. So is it possible that you are able to? Yeah. So basically in English, the longer the question or the request, the more indirect it is. In Arabic, it's not like that. It's very short, but then the more the prayers, the more polite it is. So it's very different, and we have confusion with Arab learners of English, because they think that they can they can replace these with the prayers with just something like please, which they don't. So that's why I think I always tell my students, for example, that don't even use them. Just think of English as something that's completely different. Like the politeness system is completely different, and don't try to just translate, because it's not going to work.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I can see a question in the chat box. I can read it for you. Can we please have an example of negative politeness markers in Arabic? This question is from Yasman Gaderi.
Negative politeness markers. In terms of prayers, I have not come across prayers that express negative politeness. They're overwhelmingly used for positive politeness. So I have to think of that. But if she can email me, I can research. That's actually very interesting, and then I can email her back. So is it Yasmin or Yasaman? Anyway, you can just write your email, and I will definitely get back to you. But in terms of my research, like the data, the results that we got from this study specifically, there was no instance of negative politeness markers in terms of prayers. But yeah, obviously, of course, yeah, I can see you said sure. So yeah, send it to me, and then I'll contact you. And thank you for your question.
To the next presentation by Amani Diaber.
Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi. Amani's talk is entitled Women Leading Linguistic Change, Sociolinguistic Reflexes of Modernization in Multilingual Societies.
Yes, thank you.
We can see your slide.
Yeah, so thank you very much. So I will start my presentation by talking about the research that I've been leading for many years now. I am a fellow visitor at the Technion University, and I had English studies for many years. And part of my linguistic research is dealing with gender issues of how women do lead linguistic changes in different societies and how this affects their practices. So I will start by my research that was conducted on my town citizens of Al Taiba. Okay, I live in an Arab town within Israel where the majority are Muslims and the citizens are trilingual. They are multilingual, but there is an interaction between Arabic, Hebrew, and English where these three languages coexist together, and they became part of the linguistic landscape in the town. And it was interesting for me to look at the way these changes and these language contact is affecting women's behavior in society. So basically, I was looking at how gender shapes the identity of women in my society, and where basically I chose to focus on research questions to explore the impact of modernization on the local Arabic language varieties in my town, then the role of women, how women lead this change in multilingual contexts, how they use different languages they master to try to have to climb the ladder of socioeconomic mobility in society. I also looked into the influence of age, how age affects the language use and the educational background of these women, whether if they were more educated or less educated. This has to do with the linguistic change that they were basically practicing or carrying out within their daily interactions. So basically, once I look at the participants and the data that I had, the study included 63 participants, where I had 31 females and 32 males. They come from different backgrounds, and I held different interviews and recorded speech. I had attitude surveys, and it was mainly a qualitative data where I tried to see what were the motivations behind the linguistic changes that were taking place in their speech. I looked into phonological variations. Once we speak about Arabic language, we have phonological variations and different variables, especially the ka sound or the cha sound, where one of them is considered is urban and the other is rural. And if I look here at the diagram here, I can see that the sound where we have the ka sound, which is considered more sophisticated, modernized. I say that we have, the adults and the youth, both of them, they use it to a higher tendency, and they're straying away from the rural sound or phonological variable. And this was mainly to show how they are modernized, educated, and etc. So this is in terms of their pronunciation. Yet when I made the zoom in on the gender variation in phonology, and I wanted to compare the males and females and the phonological use of them, if we look at this diagram where I have the blue, which is the K, the modernization, a symbol or indicator, I can see that in both cases, the female youth and female adults, both of them use the modernized version of the colloquial Arabic variable, phonological variable, to a higher extent than the males. And where the males basically are more traditional, they reflect the preservation of their society, of their traditions. They think that if they adopt a new form of speech, then they are kind of betraying their traditions. That's why they tend less to adopt new variations of phonological sounds. Now, if I look at more examples, and I have to say that this study was carried out over a period of 5 years, where I usually, went out and recorded people's speech, and I tried to analyze what's going on there. So again, here we see that there is a huge tendency, a strong indicator of gender differences, where females use 3 times more the ka sound, which is a phonological variable indicating modernized speech style, in contrast to males. Basically, females outnumber the males in the usage of this modernized variable. Now, when we talk about the phonological variation, again, here we see the same trend. I can see here in the red color where males are sticking more to the traditional village kind of colloquial speech. Now, once I checked the gender influence on the phonological variation or choice of the participants, I decided also to look at their educational background. And once I asked one of the participants, why do you, use such a phonological variable or sound? Why do you adopt it? And they say, your education is your weapon. So basically, if they adopt a different or more modernized sound or phonological sound, for them, it is a sign of education. This is how to show the society that they are more educated, that they are at a higher level, and this is kind of a status. Now, another sign or another indicator of education or modernization that was used by female participants was code switching. So as I said before, the community in my town is trilingual and they use Arabic, Hebrew, and English interchangeably. So basically they try to use code switching, okay, to mix the languages in their conversation for identity expression. Meaning, if they want in one speech, if they chose to speak purely Arabic, so that was for them as a sign of loyalty to the language. And this was an expression or a performance made by males mainly. But if we look at what females were doing at this diagram, the code switching to Hebrew and the code switching to English from the native language, we can see that in the blue, diagram here, the blue indicator, that females were code switching to a much higher extent than males. Basically, they chose to insert Hebrew and English lexical items within their speech just to show that we're more educated, that we're sophisticated, we're experts, and we are modernized. We are kind of keeping a distance from the traditional society. We're going to the outside world. And this was interesting because even when I compared these female participants to the male participants with the same level of education, same background, same community, the males didn't adopt this form of behavior. Now, in terms of my sociocultural interpretation of what was going on within the study, and it was very interesting, there were several reasons why this was happening. So I'll start with women as innovators. So women play a crucial role as linguistic innovators, leading changes that reflect modern societal values and aspirations. Thereby, they were reshaping the language of their communities. Men were the preservers. In contrast, men were more cultural preservers. They maintained the traditional linguistic norms and they resisted the change. And they highlighted the complexities of identities within these social roles. Now, once we look at the educational impact, the education enhances linguistic flexibility, allowing individuals, especially women, to navigate between languages and styles, fostering both personal and social empowerment in multilingual contexts. So this basically was my social interpretation for the language changes that were taking place. I would like now to look at the broader significance for the linguistic modernization. if I look more into what was happening and the performances, the linguistic performances that both sides of the studies were taking part at, so I would look at women's empowerment, educational innovation, and the index of emancipation. In terms of women's empowerment, the language modernization reflects women's empowerment, showcasing their evolving roles in society and influencing linguistic practices that challenge traditional norms and promote gender equality. In terms of educational innovation, the drive for education fosters linguistic innovation, enabling women to navigate and reshape language. And this was consistent with previous studies in the field. And they were kind of participating in modern socioeconomical landscapes. Women's linguistic behavior serves also as an index for emancipation, and they were illustrating how language choices become markers of identity, empowerment, and social change within diverse communities. So these are very broad social indications that are worth looking deeper into. And for that sake, I also indicated here the future research directions that I think are worthwhile investigating in future research. First of all, we're looking at community studies, digital linguistics, perhaps self-representation studies, educational impact, to look more into the educational impact, the methodological innovations, also another path that we can develop to a further extent, and basically looking at to extend the research to diverse Arab communities outside of my town, to explore AI's influence on language evolution, perhaps to investigate multilingual identities among professionals, to assess educational influences on linguistic change, and to develop new methodologies. So basically, all of these points are points that are worthwhile investigating. And I should know that in terms of exploring AI's influence on the language evolution, this is a new study that I just started planning this year. So to start looking at how AI basically influences the language attitudes of multilingual learners towards their foreign language acquired. So that was basically it. I'm sorry if I was too quick. And thank you. If you have more, if you have questions, I am more than happy to answer.
Thank you.
I just thank you again, Amani Jaber, for your brilliant presentation. And now the turn of Kirli is talking about disagreement as a resource for affiliation Korean talk interaction. Okay.
Yeah, I am Kyungmi Ha, and my presentation topic is disagreement as a resource for affiliation in Korean talking interaction. So let me first talk about my theoretical framework. So this research is under conversation analytic framework. And in conversation analytic framework, assessments such as first and second assessments are prevalent in conversation, although it's not as closely linked as a question and answer pair in terms of mobilizing responses. So first assessments take an explicit on-record evaluative stance that is available to be agreed with or disagreed within the next turn. And second assessments are produced by recipients for prior assessments in which the reference in the seconds are the same as those in the priors. So second assessments are proposed through agreement, disagreement, or adjustment according to heritage and pomerance. Let me first talk about the disagreement in the context of conflict. In prior conversation analytic research on disagreement has primarily focused on conflictual sequences. For instance, pomerance shows disagreements as a disprepared action, and agreement is a prepared action, typically associated with resistance, opposition, or rejection. And in this kind of context, particularly in English, Japanese, and Korean conversation, disagreements are frequently delayed and mitigated or preceded by devices such as initial agreement, pauses, or repetition, in order to manage the dispreferred nature of the action. So I'm going to show you one example for South Korean disagreement. In South Korean conversation, according to Ha's study, expressions such as 근데, which means but, silence, laughter, agreement first and disagreement later format are used to delay or mitigate the force of disagreement. So I have this data here. So in this piece of conversation, you see the three speakers. And then here we can observe instance of disagreement and how other speakers respond to that. So I'm going to play the video.
저 선생님은 질문받아도 좋지 않나?
그런가요? 선생님 받았어요?
So I don't think anybody understands Korean here, but here is the transcription. So when you see in line number 1, Ari says, don't teachers like students question? So response to this statement, this assessment, you can see there are many forms of delays. In line number 2, there's a 2-second of silence. In line number 3, we see the head tilt gesture. And then line number 4, the speaker song is laughing to mitigate the coming of the disagreement. And in line number 5, we see the delay in the expression of is that so? I am not sure. And again, the speaker is looking down to mitigate the coming of the disagreement. And in line number C, we finally see the disagreement with the assessment in line number 1. So Charles says it depends on the teacher. So again, he's utilizing the mitigating gestures, looking down and then looking at the other speakers, not really making an eye contact. So as we can see, providing a disagreement to an assessment in this context, in South Korean conversation, is not immediate. It's usually delayed and mitigated. And in this present study, we would like to examine how disagreement can be interactionally mobilized as a prepared action in Korean conversation. And specifically, we would like to show that Korean speakers may affiliatively deploy disagreement in non-confrontational sequences. For instance, when responding to compliments, self-deprecating remarks, or co-participants' offers to take on a greater share of responsibility. And for data and method, so we are using the conversation analytic approach here. And CA is a well-developed qualitative approach to the study of social interaction that aims to describe, analyze, and understand talk through a series of topics, including turn-taking, preference organization, sequence organization, and so on. And for this study, the researchers' personal collection of the conversation data and the call-friend telephone conversation data are used. And from these 12 hours of Korean conversation, 40 instances of disagreements were found. And the conversation was spontaneous and topic was not given, so the conversation was not controlled. And all conversations are transcribed based on the CA transcript convention. The CA transcript convention allows a researcher to analyze the moment-by-moment interaction. So I'm going to show you the quantitative result first. So as we saw in the data section, so we found 40 instances of disagreement from the 12 hours Korean conversation. And out of the 40 instances, 22 instances of disagreements occurred in the context of conflict. So most of them about different point of view. And there was one instance, they are kind of trying to find out what's right. So it was about factual information. So they are negotiating the factual information. And the rest, the 23, so 17 instances of disagreement actually occurred in non-conflict context. 9 instances, 22.5% of disagreement occurred, was a disagreement when responding to compliments. And 4 instances, so 10% of disagreement occurred when responding to self-deprecating remark. And 10%, another 10% occurred when responding to co-participants' offers to take on a greater share of responsibility. But I'm going to show you data related to these two categories, responding to compliments and responding to self-deprecating remarks. So let me first show you this data. It's about responding to compliment. I have the audio file. I'm going to play this. Although I don't think anyone understands Korean, but it'll be much easier to understand the
우리
concept.
부처타 제자 이럴 거야.
간단히 교육시키고 있잖아.
어?
간단히 교육시키고 있다고 학교에서 친구들하고 착하게 하라고.
아니 착하지.
왜 그래도 또 지 맘대로 막 하려고 그러잖아요.
응.
그렇게 하지 말고 제자한테 친하게.
어떻게 공부하는 거 그 아직은 모르나?
So here, in this piece of conversation, as you can hear, we hear two female speakers talking about the two female speakers, Mijin and Bori. So here they are talking about Mijin's daughter's wild personality first. So Mijin says, I've been disciplining her quite strictly these days. And Bori is asking for confirmation, and then asking for, is repeating the information. And Mijin says, I've been disciplining her quite strictly to be nice toward her friends at school. So when Bori listened to Mijin, Bori is giving compliment on Mijin's daughter. Bori says, oh, she's a good kid. And then she laughs. But immediately, in response to this compliment on Mijin's family member, Mijin provides disagreement. Mijin says, well, still she keeps trying to do things her own way. And Bori kind of passively agrees. Is not really providing much comments, passively agrees with Mijin, and then seems like the conversation is ending here, and then they are moving on to a different topic. So here, what I'm arguing is that not just in this context, in Korean conversation, when someone receives a compliment about themselves or their family members, including their child, they tend to respond with disagreement rather than acceptance. So this suggests that in Korean conversation, a disagreeing response can function as a prepared response to compliment, especially in non-conflict contexts. And now I'm going to show you one more. Going to show you one more conversation here. So in this conversation, we can observe self-deprecation remark. I'm going to play the audio file again.
알지. 후회를 많이 했어 이미. 아까워 죽겠지 시간이. 저 2, 3분 더 하면 되는데 뭐 그 비용이 더 안 되잖아. 그리고 저기 생활비 비싸잖아. 그렇지 뭐. 근데 이 아파트가 한 25구 되고. 근데 이제 학비는 공짜. 응? 직장 됐어? 아니 직장은 안 됐는데. 되면은.
So in this conversation, so we can hear two male speakers talking about their career choices, especially about Hajun's, the first speaker's career choices and his choice of graduate school. They are friends who are in their 20s to 30s, and in this piece of conversation, Minho disagrees with Hajun's utterance, expressing this self-deprecation in line 1. So in line 1, Hajun says he regretted so much that he wasted a lot of time navigating his school choice and career choices. And in response to this self-deprecation, Minho actually immediately disagrees by saying that Hajun only needs to attend this school a little more, and that the only thing needed more is the cost of schooling in line 2. And Minho continues to talk about the expensive cost of living that Hajun pays. In the following turn, Hajun talks about the rent and tuition. As Minho disagrees with Hajun's self-criticism, the topic of their conversation is geared toward the cost of attending school, including the rent and tuition. So Minho is not really talking about the time that Hajun feels that it's wasted. So he's changing the topic geared toward the cost of the living, not the time. So we can see the disalignment to this deprecating remark. So as shown in this example, by disagreeing with his interlocutor's self-criticism, a speaker helps his interlocutor to feel better about the current issue and solidify the social solidarity. So this kind of example, we can also find this kind of example in other pieces of conversation in the data. So yeah, I'm gonna move on to discussion and conclusion. So this present study examines how disagreement can be interactionally mobilized as a prepared action in Korean conversation. And specifically, it shows that Korean speakers may affiliatively deploy disagreement in non-confrontational sequences, for instance, when responding to self-deprecating remark and compliment. And in these contexts, disagreement is not oriented to as oppositional, but rather as a practice for accomplishing social solidarity. And this study also reveals differences in immediacy between disagreement in conflictual and non-conflictual setting. So in conflictual setting, disagreements were usually delayed and mitigated according to prior research. But in this kind of non-conflictual setting, usually we can observe immediate disagreement. And in conflictual, immediate disagreement. And yeah, so here I have a page for limitation and future research. Because of the data set is limited, future research should include more data to strengthen the analysis. Okay, thank you so much. And if you guys have any question, I'll be here to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. It was interesting.
Thank you again, Kyung-mi. So we can move to the presentation number 20 if they're ready. Yaya Srivastava.
Greetings, everyone. Greetings. The title of my paper is Language, Cognition, and the Poetics of Solitude in Dylan Thomas. I'm Dr. Jaya Srivastava, Assistant Professor from the Department of Humanities, Social Sciences and Management, National Institute of Technology, Srinagar, India. Dylan Thomas's poetry, often described as a fusion of sensual lyricism and metaphysical intensity, continually enacts the tension between inner consciousness and external reality. Among his works, Ears in the Turrets Here stands out as a striking meditation on solitude, artistic identity, and the dialectic between self-containment and communication. Written in Thomas's characteristic blend of musical language and imagistic compression, the poem constructs a world where sensory perception and spatial metaphors converge to dramatize the artist's existential dilemma, whether to remain enclosed within the purity of isolation or to risk exposure through contact with the world. The oscillation between these two impulses, withdrawal and openness, forms the affective and structural core of the poem, inviting interpretation through both stylistic and cognitive poetic frameworks. Stylistics as a method of inquiry enables a close examination of how linguistic form embodies and enacts meaning. In Thomas's poem, cohesive pattern of repetition, parallelism, and lexical recurrence not only sustain rhythmic and semantic unity, but also mirror the recursive movements of thought characteristic of an anxious and introspective mind. Phrases such as ears in the turrets here and hands grumble on the door exemplify a syntactic and semantic patterning that fuses sensory perception with physical environment, producing a language of embodiment that is at once interior and external. This interaction between linguistic texture and psychological experience foregrounds the ways in which stylistic patterning becomes a mean of representing mental states and creative struggle. Cognitive poetics complements this stylistic approach by situating linguistic choices within broader processes of human cognition, perception, conceptualization, and embodied simulation. Drawing on frameworks such as text world theory, given by Worth and Gavins, cognitive grammar by Lengaker, and conceptual metaphor theory, Lecoff and Johnson, the poem may be read as a dramatization of the mind's negotiation between containment and permeability. Spatial and bodily metaphors, such as White House, island, door, hands, locks, and ships, map the poet's psychological state onto a concrete typography of isolation. The repeated didactic expressions such as this White House, this island, establish a perspectival immediacy, situating the reader within the poet's internal space and highlighting how language constructs mental worlds that are both perceptual and conceptual. The containment metaphors such as sea of flesh, bone cost, reinforced this cognitive mapping by literalizing the boundary between self and other, suggesting that the poet's body and the island are contiguous symbolic domains, both shelters and prisons. At the same time, the poem's recursive refrain, hands hold you poison or grapes, embodies a cognitive and affective oscillation between two conceptual poles, danger and nourishment, alienation and communion. This binary encapsulates the artist's dilemma over whether contact with others will contaminate or enrich his creative identity. The tension between poison and grapes thus function as a metaphorical schema organizing the entire text, binding linguistic rhythm to psychological rhythm. From a text world perspective, the poem's world switches from the confined White House to the wider island, and the anchoring ships chart the movement from interiorized subjectivity towards intersubjective negotiation, a dynamic that parallels the cognitive process of perspective taking and self extension. The stylistic and cognitive dimensions together reveal the isolation in ears in the turrets here, and reveals that it is not a static condition but a process of mental oscillation and recursive self-examination. The poem's linguistic surface, the interplay of repetition, phonological patterning, and semantic opposition, this acts as a cognitive network that mirrors the operations of the mind under existential strain. Through these patterns, Thomas transforms the solitude of the poet into a dramatized mental landscape where language both expresses and constitutes thought. Ultimately, this study proposes that the poem exemplifies how stylistic form and cognitive structure collaborate to stage the poetics of solitude as an embodied, dynamic negotiation rather than a fixed state of withdrawal. Thomas's linguistic inventiveness reveals the interdependence of cognition and creativity, showing how poetic language not only reflects but also reshapes the human experience of isolation and the longing for recognition. By integrating insights from stylistics and cognitive poetics, the paper demonstrates how Ears in the Turrets here becomes both a text and a thought process, a verbal architecture of the mind that continually reimagines the boundaries between self and world. The analysis of Dylan Thomas's Ears in the Turret here is grounded in a dual framework that combines stylistic analysis and cognitive poetics. This methodological synthesis allows for an investigation of how linguistic form and literary imagination converge to represent artistic isolation and existential dilemma. While classical stylistics focuses on describing the structural and semantic organization of the text, cognitive poetic extends this inquiry to the mental processes through which readers construct meaning. From a stylistic perspective, the study attends the lexical cohesion, semantic parallelism, phonological patterning, and foregrounding. These features reveal how formal repetition and variation contribute to the rhythmic texture and thematic continuity of the poem. Drawing on Halliday and Hassan's concept of cohesion and Leach and Short's stylistic categories, the analysis identifies how patterns of recurrence, such as ears in the turrets here and hands grumble on the door, generate a self-referential rhythm that mirrors the poet's recursive contemplation. At the same time, cognitive poetic frameworks such as textual theory, cognitive grammar, and conceptual metaphor theory are employed to explore how readers mentally stimulate the poem's world. Textual theory elucidates the shifts between internal and external frames of reference, the White House, the island, and the ships, as representations of mental space. Cognitive grammar helps interpret how deixis, for example, this White House, this island, and perspective construe viewpoint, while conceptual metaphor theory provides a lens to decode the embodied metaphors that structure the poet's understanding of isolation, such as isolation is containment or self is island. Methodologically, the paper adopts a close reading approach, combining linguistic description with conceptual mapping. Each stanza is examined for its cohesive and metaphorical patterns, which are then interpreted in relation to cognitive processes such as embodiment, viewpoint construction, and conceptual blending. This interdisciplinary methodology underscores how stylistic and cognitive tools together make visible the dynamic interplay between linguistic form, mental imagery, and affective experience in Thomas's poetry. The poem's stylistic architecture rests upon the dynamic interaction between cohesion, parallelism, and opposition. Cohesive devices organize the text into a network of lexical and semantic relations that sustain its thematic focus on solitude and contact. A repetition of key lexical items such as ears, eyes, hands, island, sea, ships, stranger establishes a sense of structural circularity, reflecting the poet's oscillation between self-enclosure and outreach. Thomas's use of lexical recurrence constructs a pattern of equivalence across body parts, ears, hands, eyes, and architectural features such as turrets, gables, door, White House, and natural elements such as island, sea, wind, fire, rain. These groups correspond metaphorically to faculties of perception, shelter, and elemental forces, suggesting that both the poet and his environment share a sentient interconnection. The house and the island, like the poet's own body, are animate participants in the drama of isolation. Semantic cohesion further emerges through conceptual binaries such as inside or outside, isolation or contact, poison or grapes, land or sea. These oppositions form a network of contrasts and dramatize the poet's uncertainty about the consequences of engagement with the world. The repeated refrain, hands hold you poison or grapes, encapsulates this tension by combining tactile immediacy with existential ambiguity. The alteration of hands as agent and questioner foregrounds the embodied dimension of artistic decision making. Repetition in Thomas's poem is both structural and psychological. Parallel constructions such as ears in the turrets here, eyes in the gable see, recur with variation as ears in this island here, eyes in this island see. These variations trace the poet's gradual spatial and cognitive movement from the confined White House to the wider island and towards the external ships. Each repetition marks a shift in cognitive stance, suggesting that the poem's progression is less temporal than perspectival. The repeated modal interrogatives, shall I unbolt or stay? Shall I run to the ships? Further convey a recursive theme, a rhythm of thought, echoing the oscillatory nature of human cognition under indecision. Phonological cohesion through alliteration, assonance, and internal rhyme creates a sonic texture that parallels the thematic rhythm of hesitation and recurrence. The interplay of soft fricatives, flesh, flying fish, and plosive consonants, bones, bay, beats, intensifies the sensory experience of the poem. These sound patterns enact the pulse of cognitive oscillation as if the phonetic fabric itself embodies the tension between resistance and release. Through these stylistic devices, Thomas constructs a poetic world where language is not merely a medium of description but a field of cognitive performance, mirroring the rhythms of thought, perception, and affect. From a cognitive poetic standpoint, Ears in the Turrets here stages the mind's struggle to balance self-preservation with the desire for connection. The poem's recurrent spatial metaphors, house, island, door, sea, ships, operate as conceptual containers that embody the poet's psychological boundaries. Within the metaphorical mapping, self-island and mind is house, the White House signifies both purity and confinement, while the door becomes the threshold between solitude and social contact. The island is described as being bound by a thin sea of flesh and a bone coast, a striking instance of embodied metaphor. Here, corporeal imagery fuses the natural and the human, suggesting that the poet's body itself is the boundary that separates inner consciousness from the external world. The containment metaphors are thus also metaphors of cognition, portraying thought as spatially enclosed yet yearning toward permeability. In textual theory terms, the poem constructs nested worlds, the internal world of the White House, the intermediate island, and the external world of ships and strangers. Each world shift reflects a mental reorientation. The repeated use of the dialectic this anchors the poet's consciousness between the immediacy of each mental space, while the rhetorical question mark transitions between self-reflection and projected intersubjectivity. The alternation of containment and openness mirrors the mental simulation of decision making, a process characterized by recursive evaluation and embodied emotion. Furthermore, conceptual metaphor theory eliminates the recurrent schema contact is risk and communication is ingestion, as in poison or grapes. The tactile imagery of hands literalizes the cognitive negotiation between approach and withdrawal. The metaphorical ambiguity of poison or grapes frames communication as both potentially destructive and nourishing, thereby capturing the ambivalence of artistic exposure. The poem's recursive questioning thus dramatizes the cognitive rhythm of hesitation, where imagination oscillates between alternative world models. Thomas transforms this mental movement into verbal music, showing how language itself can simulate the processes of cognition, its hesitations, recursions, and embodied resonances. In Years in the Turrets Here, Dylan Thomas fuses linguistic patterning with cognitive architecture to explore solitude as an active process of self-definition. The poem's stylistic cohesion and cognitive metaphors together stage the mind's oscillation between withdrawal and engagement, illustrating that artistic isolation is not a fixed condition, but a dynamic negotiation of boundaries. Stylistically, Thomas's recursive syntax, lexical cohesion, and phonological patterning generate a textual rhythm that mirrors mental repetition and hesitation. Cognitively, the containment and threshold metaphors such as house, island, door, ships externalize internal states of anxiety, desire, and self-preservation. The poem thereby demonstrates how linguistic form and conceptual structure coalesce to represent thought as movement, perception, and embodied tension. By integrating insights from stylistics and cognitive poetics, the analysis reveals that Thomas's language functions simultaneously as textual fabric and cognitive network. His art exemplifies how poetry can render the invisible process of consciousness invisible through linguistic design. The poetics of solitude in the poem is not merely about separation from the world, but about the recursive cognitive labor of constructing selfhood within and against that separation. Ultimately, Years in the Turrets Here embodies the paradox of artistic life itself, the need for privacy as the precondition of creation, and the equally compelling need for communication as the validation of art. Thomas transforms this existential tension into verbal architecture, a music of mind that enacts the perpetual motion between isolation and expression, silence and speech, thought and language. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation, Gaia.
I think this was the last presentation of the session, and I ask Kati if.
Thank you. So thank you. As the administrator of the International Linguistic Society, I'd like to take this moment to say thank you to everybody participation, especially to moderators and chairs, and definitely to the keynotes, and definitely without the presenters and your research, we wouldn't be able to put these things together. So from us as the society, thank you very much for your participation, and we hope to see you again next year, potentially back in Paris. Have a look and see where we're going to be. I'm not too sure. And also I appreciate that this has been a very long session, so thank you also for sticking with us, and yeah, so thank you very much, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks to you, Kathy, and thank you very much again to all the organizing committee. And
yeah, well, I was trying to keep it short. I should say thank you to Antonis Botinis, the organizing committee, our local representatives, but the list is very long, and I'm sure you're all eager to go and get your lunch or something. So thank you very much for attending, and hope to see you all next time.
Okay. See you in Paris next time.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.